Some parents do everything in their power to mitigate screen harms at home, but then their children go to school and they experience hours of screen time in the guise of educational technology, or EdTech.
So I've been sent that video numerous times today asking for my opinion and my view on it as someone who advocates for teachers to embrace technology. I just want to start by saying, if schools are sort of forcing children to be on screens for multiple hours every day, they're definitely doing it wrong. Now, as it does mention in that video, if you watch the whole video, I think moderation is absolutely key with students using technology in school. As time goes by, I'm getting to the point now where I genuinely think the best thing we can do as a generation of parents is just not give children access to technology outside of school, because we can't put the safeguards in to protect them. We've gone from completely overprotecting children in the real world to now completely underprotecting them in the digital world, and that is having a lot of negative consequences. You know, when it comes to children using technology in school, we should be able to put the safeguards in so at least they are using the technology safely. Most of us, if not all, whether we're adults or children, when it comes to using this technology outside of school, we are consumers. We are just consuming content, whether that be playing video games, whether it be scrolling through social media, watching videos, whatever it might be. Everything in moderation. In small doses, being a consumer can be absolutely fine. It can be quite fun, it can be quite entertaining, even educational in some ways. But if you're not then aware of how the algorithms of social media works, then that can quickly lead into excessive screen time. It can lead you to being manipulated or even radicalized by content you're seeing on social media, which can then affect things like your mental health. I'm speaking to you as an adult. Think about children who don't have any education around this, and this is where we're seeing so many of them becoming addicted, seeing the impact it has on their mental health and how it can also affect behavior. Now, I saw a quote recently that really hit home, which was, as soon as you give your child access to social media, you end their childhood. Which is why I can definitely see the argument for banning children's access to technology like this outside of school. However, in school, it can be different. A couple of things about why I think schools get it wrong with technology is, one, they'll buy the tech, but they don't have the long-term vision about implement it effectively. They tend to spend a lot of money on getting tech in, but then only use it in the same way I've described it as a consumer, where it doesn't really add anything to what you were doing before on paper. The vast majority of schools simply use technology to substitute what you could already do. Now, something I talk about on my training is always asking the question, well, what is technology adding to this task that we couldn't do before? How is the technology transforming, redefining the task? Because if it's simply substituting what we could do on paper, there's no point using the technology. And I think that lack of implementation, lack of vision, and lack of training for teachers means teachers don't use the technology in the way they should do, and therefore it doesn't really add to learning. For example, one thing I use technology for in my classroom is for children to record themselves orally explaining their understanding, which they can then listen back to, and that can then really support with the writing. And that is something that you can't do on paper, or for some children, getting their understanding down on paper can be a bit of a barrier. The technology removes that barrier, meaning that children can record themselves explaining their knowledge and understanding about a particular topic. That work can then be evidence for the children to access again, to revisit that learning, or, like I just said, support with the writing. And that is almost transforming a particular task, because you can't do that on paper. The children can't record themselves talking it through. Or if they do oracy in class, drama, role play, that's absolutely fine, but not documenting it means that children can't necessarily refer back to it, whereas the technology gives you that opportunity. That's where I found it to be a really powerful tool, especially for children with different SEND needs. I always talk on my training about my own son Harry, who is dyslexic, and how I found the technology can really help him by removing that barrier to allow him to access the curriculum. Tools like the dictation tool in his iPad, so he can talk through his ideas and have it typed for him, has been an absolute game changer. Tools like Microsoft Office Lens, where he can scan a text, have it presented in a much more accessible format, really does help him. Like I've said, moderation is key. I don't want any student sitting on a laptop on a screen for hours. That's not what we want. Plus, we also need to think how we are choosing to use the devices in class, because if we are simply substituting what we're already doing on paper, that's not really an effective use of the technology. However, if the tech is redefining and transforming what we could do before, I think that can really support learning. But that's about teachers having the knowledge and the training to know how to implement that technology effectively so it can be a useful tool. And if children are using the technology in that way, in moderation, in school where it can be safeguarded, then they start to see it as a positive thing and learn how to use it effectively and creatively. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where so many of our children have unfiltered, unmonitored access to this technology without any time limits at home, outside of school, without those safeguards. And that's where I think we're seeing a real negative impact of this technology. And I agree, excessive screen time is a massive issue, but I also think not all screen time is equal.